As we close out the week, we'll take a look at Pro Football Focus's thoughts on the Raiders roster, their strengths, their weaknesses, and who is the X factor. That and a whole lot more comes up on Friday's edition of the Locked On Raiders podcast for May 31st, 2024.
You are Locked On Raiders, your daily Las Vegas Raiders podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
And welcome in, Raider Nation, to another edition of the Locked On Raiders podcast. Thank you so much for making the show your first listen of the day. Make sure you subscribe or follow for free on YouTube or wherever you get your podcast. To get the latest edition of the show as soon as it becomes available, as always, if you're checking us out on YouTube, you know we appreciate that. The show grows each and every day, and that's because of the support of you, Raider Nation, and because of my man, Ari. So thank you to Raider Nation for helping out, continuing to support the show, and thank you to my man, Ari, for continuing to make sure that the show looks good, sounds good. We're doing what we're supposed to do by way of YouTube. You can hit Ari up on Twitter at Ari Producers. You can hit me up as well at your boy Q254. And we got the Locked On Raider podcast voicemail line at 707-654-4693. Your calls and texts, and we got a lot of them. It's coming up in segment number 3, so we'll get as many in as possible as we close out the week, close out the month really, really strong. That'll be in segment number 3. Segment number 2, we'll take a look at Pro Football Focus and what they think of the Raiders roster, where it ranks amongst the other 32 teams across, or the other 31 teams across the National Football League. What's the strength of the roster? What's the weakness in the roster? And who is the X factor? We'll take a look at all of that coming up in segment number 2 of today's Locked On Raiders podcast. Here in segment number 1, just news and notes of the day. We'll jump right into it after I tell you about the title sponsor of the show, which is Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use promo code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms do apply. And off top, on Saturday, it's not only the first of the month. Not only will we wake up and say, wake up, wake up, wake up, it's the first of the month. Normally, that's what we say. It's the hood holiday, right? That's just kind of how we get down. That's how we celebrate. That's always been what we do. Well, the Raiders will be doing that on Saturday and really be celebrating that come Sunday, because that'll be post-June 1. What does that mean? Well, that means Jimmy G's contract is dropping off of their salary cap. So they're going to earn a basic $23.8 million. It's going to be in their bank account. So imagine that, waking up and having an extra $23.8 million in your bank account. Not too bad. That's salary cap space. There'll be around $34-35 million in salary cap space once it's all said and done. So you ask the question, what do they do with it? Well, there's multiple things that they can do with that, and they don't have to get crazy and just go spend it all just because it's there, right? Like my mom used to say, don't let that money burn a hole in your pocket, right? They're not going to do that. Tom Telesco, the front office is a lot smarter than that. But I do see some areas where they can address their needs and the roster and really the future of the roster with that extra salary cap space that they have. One, I do believe you'll see a couple of extensions come in the way of guys that have earned those contract extensions, guys that are in the final year of their deal, and that could be anyone like a Robert Spillane. That could be a Nate Hobbs. That could be a Trayvon Merrick. That could be a Marcus Epps. That could be a Malcolm Kuntz, right? We've talked about it earlier in the week. It could be any of those guys. I do think one or two of those guys will be extended before the season gets started, just to go ahead and make sure the Raiders have them locked up, guys that they see as future dudes, right? Guys that can help this team moving forward. I could see a couple of those guys being signed. But also, as we've talked about the Raiders roster, we've talked about a few position groups that, could still be areas of concern. I think most of us agreed that the running back room, just because we haven't seen Zamir White as a full-time starter, we only saw him in a small sample size when he started the last 4 games of the season when Josh Jacobs was out. Just kind of wait and see what that room looks like, him and Alexander Madison. I don't really think that they need to go out and make another move for another running back. They have a pretty good amount of depth in that room. But I could see them going out and making a move for a free agent cornerback, defensively, a guy to go across from Jack Jones. We know Jack Jones is there. We know Nate Hobbs is in the slot, but who's going to play opposite of Jack Jones? And on top of that, we have seen Nate Hobbs get injured the last couple seasons, whether they're fluke injuries or not, which a few of them have been. He's missed multiple games. So I could see them going out and signing a free agent cornerback or two, if for nothing else, competition and depth. Right, I'm not saying that they're going to end up being a starter. I mean, hell, last year they went out and signed Marcus Peters, and a lot of us thought, okay, that's going to be a nice addition. He's a veteran. He's a guy that has made a habit and a career of getting after the ball, and that didn't work out very well. But there are guys like Xavier Howard, He's a ball hawk throughout the course of his career. Stephon Gilmore, of course, he's put together a hell of a career. Steven Nelson, he's a quality cornerback. Adoree Jackson's kind of hot and cold, but still young enough to be at least competition or depth. And then Trey Herndon, he's worked with Coach Caldwell, who's on the Raiders staff now. So, I mean, that's a little familiarity there. Xavier Howard's worked with Patrick Graham before, so some familiarity there. Those are just a handful of guys that I could see, the Raiders looking at and saying, yeah, maybe, before training camp starts, we add a guy or two. I would not be surprised to see them make some kind of addition once they get that extra money in their bank account. So, that's what I think that they'll do. They'll still probably have plenty of cap space left over. I mean, that's a great position to be in, right? Already have a 90-man roster put together and have about $34 million in salary cap space. Again, you don't have to spend all that money, but it's nice to have that money. So look to see if the Raiders make any roster moves or extend a few of their guys that they feel like have earned contract extensions. I also, for segment number 1, and this will be the final thing I have for you this segment, wanted you to hear from Bill Barnwell. He's from ESPN, does fantastic work, all things NFL, from, win-loss, win total projections, kind of roster rankings, and just taking a look at the whole National Football League. I had him on my radio show on Thursday, Unnecessary Roughness, on Raider Nation Radio 920, and I've been pretty passionate about this conversation when it comes to the AFC and, how can the Raiders be one of the top 7 that make the playoffs, right? And I looked at 13 teams that I say I can make an argument that could all be fighting for 7 playoff positions coming up in 2024. And, we know the teams that won the division. We know the teams that are wild cards. And we know the teams that just were on the outside of the playoffs looking in, including the Silver and Black. So he was on my radio show. We talked for about 15, 16 minutes, all things AFC. I'm not going to play that whole interview for you, but I did want you to hear what he had to say about the Raiders. And, it's funny. He talked about the Steelers and he said if they're going to be competing for the playoffs, they're going to be leaning on their defense. If the Colts are going to be, complaining, or not complaining, but competing for the playoffs, they're going to be leaning on the defense. So I said, okay, well, if it's good for those two teams, could it be good for the Raiders? Could they lean on their defense and just, get good offensive play, not elite offensive play, but lean on the defense, get some good offensive play? Could they be competing for the playoffs as well? Here's what Bill Barnwell had to say, a little back and forth, all things Silver and Black.
If you get the defense from the second half of last year, they absolutely can. And we saw that, right? I mean, they blew out the Chargers. They beat the Chiefs. You can't count on getting 2 defensive touchdowns in 2 plays against the Chiefs, but they still did a good job of stopping the Chiefs the rest of that game. You saw, the secondary take a step forward. Of course, Matt Crosby to me is, one of the 2 or 3 best pass rushers in all of football. And now you attack a major weakness. You bring in Christian Wilkins, a player who was really good with the Dolphins. Even last year, where they were running, the Vic Fangio defense, you're kind of taking a gap and a half up front. You're not really given total freedom to penetrate and go after the quarterback. And now with the Raiders, presumably with Patrick Graham, he's going to be given the opportunity to go do that. So, I feel like this is a really exciting pass rush. I think Cruz played well last year. We don't know what we're going to get from Tyree Wilson. I think if you get something from him, that's even a bonus. But I do think, if we're sitting here at the end of the season and the Raiders are a playoff team, it's going to be because the defense played at a high level as opposed to maybe the offensive side of the ball leading the way.
Right, and that's what a lot of the conversation is about, the quarterback play is not, it's not elite quarterbacks that they're choosing from, not even great quarterbacks, that they're guys that look like they can be good, and we've seen Gardner Minshew win games, we've seen Aiden O'Connell win games. Could it be a recipe as simple as, and I guess nothing simple, but, as long as they get good, consistent quarterback play, they could be in the mix as long as that defense like they did at the end of the season last year?
Yeah, I really think the one thing they need on offense is they need to have something they can rely upon, whether it's the short passing game, whether it's the rushing attack. I think if you can have something where you're not turning the ball over a ton and you have something you're good on offense where you can move the ball downfield, maybe that's Devontae Adams, who obviously can still play at a high level. If you do go out and have that one thing on offense you can rely upon and have your defense win you games, I feel like that's a formula you can win with. Now, of course, Gardner Minshew, I think, is a underrated quarterback, a guy who can keep you in a lot of games. He can also throw you out of games if you have a rough day. So I think for the Raiders, the tough part really is balancing whoever wins that job, in training camp, whoever the week 1 starter is, how much, leeway do you give him? How many, sort of turnovers do you give him? Do you go back and forth? Because I think back into the tough part where you have, 2 quarterbacks where it doesn't feel like there's an obvious starter, you can destroy both quarterbacks' confidence if you do go back and forth, if you do constantly bench one for the other. And I think the coaching staff, Antonio Pierce's staff, is going to have to strike that balance and be smart about when they do make a change, if they do. But I do believe this is a team where, again, if we get the defense in the second half, that can be a very competitive football team.
We got a chance to talk to Marvin Lewis yesterday, and he's obviously a longtime head coach in the National Football League. Now he's AP's assistant head coach. How much do you think he can help out with Antonio Pierce getting into the rhythm and getting used to being a head coach in the National Football League?
It goes a long way. And to me, it's not a schematic thing. I really believe it's just an experience and maybe a temperament thing. Antonio Pierce obviously did a good job last year. This is a guy who had never really had any significant head coaching experience. He'd been not a great head coach at the high school level. I mean, it really is a situation where he had to learn on the fly, and I think that can be a positive, right? Because your players get behind you. I think the locker room really believes in Antonio Pierce, and that's really a positive. But I think as a head coach, this is a tough job week after week. It's I think you have to deal with adversity. I think you have to deal with injuries. You have to deal with expectations. And that's where I think Marvin Lewis can play a big role. It's just, hey, I've seen everything in the NFL. I've been a coordinator. I've won. I've been a head coach and we've won. I think just seeing that week-to-week perspective of, okay, this isn't the end of the world. This isn't something where we have to make a major change. Just let's see the course. Trust your beliefs. Trust your abilities. Antonio Pierce, of course, did that as a player, but it's different as a head coach. And so I think having an experienced coach in Marvin Lewis to supplement what Antonio Pierce is bringing to the table makes total sense.
So I like what he had to say. If the Raiders have that defense that they had at the end of the season, then yeah, sure, they could definitely be in position to compete for, a playoff spot, regardless what that is, whether that's competing with the Chiefs for the AFC West division title or if that's a wild card spot, it's possible. And I also love what he said about the offense, and I'm really going to hang on to that. What is it that the Raiders are going to do really well? Right. And at some point on this show, we'll talk about, okay, what is it that I've identified that this team does really well? Right. We knew when they were a really strong run team that it was going to be based off the defense and the run game. Is that what it's going to be in 2024? We don't know until we see it. But I'm definitely going to hang on to that and hopefully be able to identify that sooner rather than later. Right. I mean, OTAs, you're not really going to be able to identify that. You'll start to be able to see some things in training camp when they're in Costa Mesa, the preseason. But early on in the regular season, it should be pretty evident, pretty obvious what the Raiders do really well offensively. If they can figure out something that they do really well, cut back on turnovers, and have that, bloodthirsty pirate style defense that they had at the end of the season in 2023, there's no doubt that they can compete for a playoff spot. That was some real good stuff from Bill Barnwell from ESPN. Coming up in segment number 2, Pro Football Focus. They put out a piece called 2024 NFL Roster Rankings, Strengths, Weaknesses, and X factors for every starting lineup. Of course, we're not going to look at all 32 starting lineups across the National Football League, but we will focus in on the silver and black. We'll do that in segment number 2 of today's Locked On Raiders podcast. Before we get to that, though, I do want to tell you about eBay Motors. Passion, drive, and patience. That's the formula for winning championships. It's also the formula for what keeps your ride or die alive. eBay Motors has everything you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performance. Superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, and more. Whether you're into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has you covered. With over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die, you'll always find exactly what you're looking for. And with eBay Guaranteed Fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time or your money back. Because with eBay Motors, you're burning rubber, not cash. With all the parts you need at the prices you want, it's easy to make your car the MVP and bring home huge wins. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. eBay Guaranteed Fit only available to U.S. customers. All right, Raider Nation, here we go. Segment number 2 of today's Locked On Raiders podcast. Want to pay attention to this article that I saw on Pro Football Focus, and I like to check in with them quite a bit, see what they're talking about. And I always say Pro Football Focus is not the end-all, be-all, but I do like to just get their thoughts, and I like to hear thoughts from everyone or read thoughts from everyone just to see where they're at, especially when it comes to the Raiders and, kind of compare and contrast what different outlets are talking about. So they have a piece out, the 2024 NFL roster rankings, strengths, weaknesses, and X factors for every starting lineup. So out of 32 teams, they have the Raiders ranked at 23rd. That's their roster strength and their roster ranking, number 23, with the over-under, over 6.5. That's been the win total that everyone's been putting out there. They have them over 6.5 wins. So at least they have that, right? A lot of folks think that they're going to win less than 6.5 games. I don't see that. They've gone over 3 out of the last 4 years, so I think that's going to continue, and clearly Pro Football Focus does as well. They said Aiden O'Connell is a big question mark for this team. If he plays at even an average level, the Raiders could surprise this upcoming season. The defensive line looks to be very imposing. O'Connell isn't going to lack weapons on offense as the team returns Devontae Adams and Jacoby Myers while featuring a two-headed monster at tight end. Then they also say the AFC West looks relatively thin outside of the defending champion Chiefs, so don't be too surprised if the Raiders could take advantage. Not bad, right? Not bad little write-up from Pro Football Focus, even though they have the Raiders roster ranked at 23rd. That's fine. Not too bad what they're saying. They're talking about competing with the Chiefs. Something similar to what, Bill Barnwell was saying, how the Raiders could compete for a playoff spot. They've got to have that, bloodthirsty Pirate-style defense, as I mentioned in segment number 1, and they've got to have good, quarterback play, good, consistent quarterback play from either Aiden O'Connell or Gardner Minshew, whoever goes ahead and wins that spot. Now, the teams that are ranked under the Raiders, again, the Raiders were ranked 23rd as far as their roster goes. The Saints, the Titans, the Chargers, the Commanders, the Cardinals, the Patriots, the Panthers, the Giants, the Broncos. That's 24 through 32 right there. So the Raiders roster looks better than all those teams right there. And look, 2 of those teams are in the AFC West. Right? I mean, the Chargers and the Broncos. The Broncos were dead last. They were 32nd. So, there's that. And then the Chargers came in at 27. The Chargers, their win total is 8.5. Pro Football Focus has them under. The Broncos, their win total was 5.5. The Pro Football Focus has them under that as well. And again, the Raiders were over 6.5 as far as their total. Now, let's get to strengths, let's get to weaknesses, and let's get to X factors. They said the biggest strength in 2023 was the defensive line. They believe the biggest strength will be the defensive line. Max Crosby finally has help along the defensive line. Not only did Malcolm Kuntz have a strong third season in the league, but the team signed Christian Wilkins away from the Dolphins in the offseason to bolster the defensive front. I think that there's no doubt about it. That is going to be the strength of the Raiders defense. They're going to go as that defensive line goes. It's going to make everyone around them that much better, from the corners to the linebackers to the safeties. Everyone gets better with those dudes up front, right? Those guys are going to be able to get after the quarterback from multiple angles, from the edge with Max, the edge with Malcolm Kuntz, Tyree Wilson when he's in the game, right? And they're obviously going to be able to, get pressure up the gut as well with Christian Wilkins, with John Jenkins, with Adam Butler, right? All those guys, hopefully a guy like Bryce Young is able to go in there and do the same thing. No, Byron Young. I would say Bryce Young. Bryce Young is a quarterback. He ain't going to get no pressure up the middle. He might get pressure up the middle. He ain't going to be providing no pressure. But Byron Young, who was a third-round pick out of Alabama, hopefully he's in the mix as well. I'm not too sure how he gets on the field. I guess he'll have to, kind of make a name for himself in preseason. But the defensive line, there's no doubt, is going to be the biggest strength. Biggest weakness, they said the offensive line. They said outside of Colton Miller, the Raiders' offensive line leaves a lot to be desired. The team signed Cody Whitehair and Andrews Pete in the offseason, but Whitehair is coming off by far the worst season of his career, a 45 ranking from Pro Football Focus grade, and Pete is projected to kick out to right tackle, a position he hasn't taken a snap at since 2018. Andre James and Dylan Parham have been solid on the interior, although there are a lot of questions surrounding the recent additions that could complicate things for this Raiders offense. So they have the starting offensive line looking like this. Left tackle Colton Miller, who had an 80.2 Pro Football Focus grade. Left guard, they have Cody Whitehair with a 45 grade. I don't think that Cody Whitehair is the starting left guard. Obviously, they'll compete during training camp, this, that, and the other, but I have JPJ there. I got the rookie, Jackson Powers-Johnson, there at the left guard spot, and I think it's really smart to slide him in between 2 vets, left tackle Colton Miller and center Andre James. Obviously, they have Andre James as the center with a 74.6 Pro Football Focus grade. Then they have right guard Dylan Parham at 60.4, and then as they mentioned in the piece, they have Andrews Pete there, a 60.2 at the right tackle. I don't see that either. I think right now that's Thayer Mumford's job to lose. Now, if he beats him out, or if Whitehair beats out JPJ in training camp, so be it. Then maybe they were right. Maybe they're onto something. But I feel like that they slid those veterans in there just because they're longtime veterans. I think those guys are depth and emergency. I don't see Whitehair or Pete being guys that are starters when the season comes around, right? When they're in SoFi Stadium taking on the Chargers on September 8th, I don't see Whitehair or Pete out there in the starting lineup. I think that's JPJ and Thayer Mumford at the left guard spot and the right tackle spot. Now, this kind of threw me for a loop as well. They said the X factor is quarterback Aiden O'Connell. They said Aiden O'Connell was thrown into the fire a little sooner than the rookie fourth rounder, probably expected, with mixed results. 65.9 was his Pro Football Focus grade, ranked 28th out of 38 quarterbacks. Though there were some solid performances mixed in, particularly in his first game against the Chiefs, where he completed 23 of 33 for 248 in a score. He also made 2 big-time throws and 0 turnover-worth plays, forming an 83.7 passing grade. So that's the write-up that they have on Aiden O'Connell, but they have him as their X factor. And that got me thinking, I don't see Aiden O'Connell as the X factor, right? I mean, Aiden O'Connell is right in the mix. When I think of an X factor, I think of someone who's, not really being talked about, who could really step up and play a big role on the Raiders offense. I look at a guy like maybe a Trey Tucker could be an X factor, right? Michael Mayer, since everyone's talking about Brock Bowers, maybe Michael Mayer steps up and is an X factor. I don't see Aiden O'Connell, who's very easily the center of everything. I mean, he's a quarterback. I find it hard to believe that he is going to be the X factor, but maybe I'm wrong. Maybe you think he could be the X factor. I just don't see it. But like I said, I see a guy like Trey Tucker. He could potentially be that guy. Maybe a Michael Mayer. Hell, Brock Bowers could be an X factor because you could line him up all over the field, right? He could just be an all-around weapon. So I feel like that those guys could be more of an X factor than Aiden O'Connell. I look at X factors as people that aren't really necessarily being talked about a lot that could be big-time contributors. And I think that we talk about Aiden O'Connell all the time, and I think a lot of folks expect Aiden O'Connell to be the starting quarterback. So, you let me know what you think. Tell me who you think the Raiders' X factor could be. Again, Pro Football Focus thinks it's Aiden O'Connell. What are your thoughts? Because I don't see it that way. I don't. I look at a guy. Trey Tucker seems like he could be the best answer there for the X factor, just because, again, he's a guy that he gets lost in the shuffle with me all the time. All right, maybe that's just me, but just with that speed, if he's really figured things out with his hands and his footwork, I think he could be a really big addition to the Raiders team. But that's just me. Again, like I said, you let me know what you think. 707-654-4693. They also said rookie to watch, Brock Bowers. Makes all the sense. And they said over-under 6.5 win total. They said over. Again, talked about that already. So that's what Pro Football Focus has to say about the Raiders roster. They ranked them at 23rd. They said the strength of the team is the defensive line, the weakness is the offensive line, and the X factor is Aiden O'Connell. What says you? Let me know. 707-654-4693. Your calls and texts are coming up in segment number 3 of today's Locked On Raiders podcast. Here we go, Raider Nation. Segment number 3 of today's Locked On Raiders podcast. Your calls and text straight off that Locked On Raider podcast voicemail line, 707-654-4693. Let's start things off with Omar calling out of El Paso. He's calling to talk about the Raiders. They're drafting to Brock Bowers and compares it to another former first-round pick the Raiders made. Little compare and contrasting of that. Also talks about the power rankings and defensive coordinator, Patrick Graham. Here he is, Omar in El Paso.
Hey, Q, it's Omar from El Paso. I'll be making the move to San Antonio, so you'll be hearing – next time you hear me, it'll be from San Antonio. So you spoke to Embassy or Harris on yesterday's show and echoed my thoughts from when they went with Bowers instead of Terran Arnold. Like everyone else, I thought we were going with the franchise corner or tackle. So I was a little upset as well. Get best player available. That's nice, I thought at the time, just because, for playoff teams, that's nice. I think when you're not even in the middle of the pack, that's kind of risky. But as you mentioned, the problem was not, those two main positions. It was just not scoring. So they got him to remedy that situation. Hopefully it works out like the last guy we drafted in the first round that everyone was shocked about. I don't know if you guys remember a guy named Sebastian Janikowski. I know there's disparity between the two positions of tight end and kicker, but those two were generational talents coming out into college. Those two were the best at the position coming out. And similar to not scoring points and getting Bowers, the Raiders lost a ton of games that year before because, they were within 3 or less points. So hopefully it works out for Bowers and for us, obviously, and he has the same type of Hall of Fame career as well. And then we also talked about preseason rankings, how the Chargers are always up, and, they basically fail at the end of the year. Well, they're always up because of the talent that was there, and Telesco got and gathered that talent. But, I think his main, problem was just not getting the coaching right. But hey, we got the talent now. He's gathered the team together. I feel comfortable with that. I feel comfortable that he didn't pick the coach. AP is the coach, and he's a leader of men, and I think that's going to work. My best buddy, he's a Lions fan, and he compares AP to Dan Campbell. He also lives in Henderson, and he's right there in front row with the Raiders, but he says that AP reminds him a lot of Dan Campbell, and that, just really needs to have a leader of men at the helm, let the coordinators do their job, and, that should, benefit us for sure. Finally, I know I disliked Patrick Graham so much for most of his tenure, but I think most of that was just because McDaniels was controlling him. And AP, again, he let his coordinators do their work. He let them do what they needed to do, and he just kind of, had that defense rolling in the second half last year. But I'm super excited about what the season brings. Thank you so much for the time and energy you give into the show. And let's go Raider Nation.
Omar, thanks for the call. Appreciate you. Congrats on your move to San Antonio. Fun city. El Paso's fun, too. Got family there. So that's great, man. Congratulations on that. Hopefully you enjoy that. As far as the comparison from Seabass and Bowers, I get where you're coming from, but I think that Seabass was still such a shock when he was selected. Not that I didn't like him as a player. Thought he was fantastic. It did make me scratch my head when they selected him in the first round. But to your point, what you said about the Raiders losing all those close games, it like shocked me at first, but it didn't shock me because we all knew that the Raiders definitely need a place kicker, and he was around for a long time, and he definitely was a Raider. So I wasn't mad at it when it's all said and done, but it's always going to be one of those the Raiders took a kicker in round one. So, Brock Bowers is much more of a weapon than Seabass was. At least he better be, right? So thanks for that. I do appreciate it. And, again, the Raiders have plenty of talent, based off what Tom Telesco already walked into, and he already made some additions as well. Patrick Graham, I love the fact that he's in his third year as a defensive coordinator. And, it was frustrating at first. A lot of folks thought he was going to be the sacrificial lamb. He was going to be the guy to go. Josh McDaniels would stick around, and instead, his defense was the strength of the team, and Josh McDaniels had to go. So I love what Patrick Graham is doing. Hopefully he can stick around for a while, but I do believe if they have another season where the defense looks the way it does, he'll probably get a head coaching job somewhere. So, but it's good to have that continuity right now with Patrick Graham and the rest of the guys on defense. Thanks for the call. I do appreciate you. And again, congratulations on the move to San Antonio. Up next, got a text from Raider Mike in Vegas. Q, it's Raider Mike in Vegas. Let me start by saying I like the direction the team is going. Looking forward to the upcoming season. Everyone right now is focused on the roster, but I think what's going to be even more important is finding consistency in our front office. You'll never have a consistent playoff contender if you're constantly shuffling coordinators, coaches, and GMs. I have a good feeling about this group, and hopefully we can build something great. Just win, baby. That's Raider Mike right here in Vegas. And, continuity is king, right? Talked about it on Thursday's show. Got to have that continuity. You see how good it works for the defense. Just having that gives them an opportunity to kind of fly around, right? But, the coaching staff, you want to have guys around for a long time. You don't want your head coach to be, every other year a new head coach, or every 2-3 years another head coach. You don't want that. You want guys to be around for the long haul. You want the front office to be in place for the long haul. I mentioned just a minute ago that Patrick Graham might be out if they have a really good, season defensively. That's something that you can't prevent. I rather, the Raiders have to replace guys because they're getting hired somewhere else for better positions than because they're firing guys. That's what you don't want to do. So you're right. You want to have that consistency in the front office, coaching staff, everyone. The longer you can have consistency, the better your team is going to be for the long haul, not just 1 year here and then all of a sudden another 5 years off, right? And that's what the Raiders have done, unfortunately, since their last Super Bowl visit, right? Only been to the playoffs a couple of times, literally a couple of times since their last Super Bowl visit. Thanks so much for the text. Appreciate you. Up next, got a call from Brad from Orlando. He's calling to talk about being excited by this team, and he does have one area of concern that he wants to talk about. Here he is, Brad from Orlando.
Hey, Q. This is Brett from Orlando, longtime Raiders fan, longtime listener, first-time caller. Really excited about what the defense could do this year, obviously with Max on one side and finally getting a dominant defensive tackle like Christian Wilkins into the fold is going to help the pass rush monumentally. My only concern with the defense is, obviously you're talking about on yesterday's episode about who's going to play the outside corner opposite Jack Jones. I possibly think that bringing in a veteran corner like a Xavier Howard would be a monumental move to solidify that second spot. I know we've seen the last couple of years the Raiders go out and trying to get a veteran presence in the cornerback room, whether it was Casey Hayward, one that worked out, or one that didn't work out like last year with Marcus Peters. I think they really need to bring another veteran into the room to solidify that unit. But thanks for all the work you do, Q, and keep it up. Let's go Raiders.
Brad, thanks so much for the call. Appreciate you. Thanks for being a first-time caller. Hopefully it's not your last time. And, yeah, the cornerback depth, that's why I talked about it in segment number 1 as potential areas that they could address once they get that extra money. I mean, they can address it right now if they want to, but with that extra money, they can really go out and address that position, go and get a veteran free agent. I think that they'll probably do it a little closer to training camp. There's really not a reason to get them right now for OTAs and mandatory minicamp. Get them for training camp and get them ready to go. Xavier Howard could be an option. There's a few others that I rolled out there in segment number 1. But I do think a move or two will be had, and I do think that it's good to get some quality depth behind Nate Hobbs. Remember Tyler Hall? Remember 37, where he was? He was a really good player. He was some good depth as well. He's no longer with the Silver and Black, right? Now number 37 is Trey Taylor, the young man out of Air Force, and he's not depth behind Nate Hobbs. So they probably need to do that for sure, just because Nate, has missed some games the last 2 seasons. Thanks for the call, my man. I definitely appreciate you. Got time for a couple more. How about a text from frustrated Raiders fan? He said, "What's up, Q? Love the show. Keep up the good work, bro. I'll keep it short and sweet. What do you think about the Raiders bringing in both Dalvin Cook and Xavier Howard? Both could be good additions to the team, in my opinion, at spots that are still questionable." That's from a frustrated Raiders fan. And, again, we've already addressed the cornerback room a couple times. I mean, you could bring in a guy like Dalvin Cook. I just don't know what he's got left, right? I mean, the Vikings let him go. He went to the Jets. He really didn't get any burn there, right? I just don't know what he's got left in the tank. I really don't know. So maybe if they bring him in, they work him out, and he looks like he's got some burst, maybe he could be a nice compliment for Zamir or Alexander Madison, a guy that he knows very well from their time together in Minnesota. But I think right now it's Zamir White's job to lose. Alexander Madison's going to have something to say about it. And if they, get into training camp and they feel like, hey, these running backs don't look like what they're supposed to look like with pads on, then I can see them making a move. But I don't think that they'll make a move for a running back until they actually get pads on the current running backs that they have. And that won't happen till training camp. Thanks so much for the text, though. I definitely appreciate you. And clearly you're thinking, like I was thinking too, that the running back room and the cornerback room is still areas of concern as far as the roster goes. Up next, got a call from the 424. It's a quick one. Don't know his name. I apologize for that. He's calling to talk about what the Raiders did for Aiden O'Connell last season that they didn't do for Jimmy G. Here he is, a call from the 424.
Hey, your boy Q. I just want to say this, man. Y'all talking about Jimmy G didn't do nothing for the Raiders. They didn't block for him like they blocked for that punk rookie Aiden O'Connell. If they had a block for him, then would they block Aiden O'Connell? And if the coach had gave him a second chance and put him in after he benched him in that Miami game, Jimmy would have ran the table. If they'd have blocked for him the way they blocked for Aiden O'Connell and gave him a running game. Y'all don't understand, man. Jimmy is an elite quarterback, and he gonna show it when Matthew Stafford get hurt. He gonna take the Rams where they need to go.
Hey, man, thanks so much for the call. I appreciate you. Next time, though, you got to call and give your name, man. You woke up and you chose violence. I could tell by the tone in that call. I don't know how Aiden O'Connell became a punk. All I saw was a guy who went from being a 4th-round pick to being thrown into the mix when Jimmy got hurt. And I saw a guy that got sacked early in the season when he got a start that I didn't think he needed to be starting against the Chargers 7 times. Right? So, I mean, if you're talking about an offensive line that blocked for Aiden O'Connell, they didn't do a very good job in that game, right? And I'm not going to blame the offensive line for Jimmy G getting hurt, right? Jimmy G, I mean, let's be honest. Come on, dude. I know you didn't leave your name, but come on, man. He's been injured his whole career. He was injured back in New England. That sure didn't have nothing to do with the Raiders' offensive line. He was injured in San Francisco. That didn't have nothing to do with the Raiders' offensive line. Hell, he was signed with the Raiders when he was still injured. He literally was injured, had to change his contract because of injury before he ever stepped foot on the field. That wasn't because of the Raiders' offensive line. Matter of fact, he didn't even practice every day in training camp because he was still recovering from the injury, which you can get a theme here, had nothing to do with the Raiders' offensive line. Let's be honest about the situation. Jimmy G is just injury prone. It's just the nature of the beast. I don't know what actually the grind you have with Aiden O'Connell. I wouldn't call him a punk. I wouldn't call Jimmy G a punk. Hell, I wouldn't call anyone who's in the National Football League a punk. I just don't see it. But okay. Well, like I said, you woke up and you chose violence. I could appreciate it. I could appreciate the enthusiasm at least. Thanks so much for the call. Like I said, next time you call, my man, leave your name. We do want to address you by your name and not the caller from the 424. We'll close out with this text from Luke in San Jose, which is the 408. It says, Q, it's Luke from San Jose. Listen to the show today, and as always, great stuff, my guy. I wanted to discuss AP. Anyone who's having doubt or hesitation as part of Raider Nation need to rethink those thoughts. He is a brilliant football mind, a natural leader, has a great feel for a team in a locker room, and most importantly, is super humble and has always wanted more input and willing and wanting input from other minds that have been there and done that. He will only continue to get better. I'm not sold on Getsy, but I'm ready to ride and see how the year goes. We all know it's a game of inches, and I want AP for the long haul. Even if things don't go our way, I want him to get multiple years. He has shown he has good long-term goal of the Raiders and what they should look like. I'm like you. I can't remember feeling this excited for a coach. Keep doing what you're doing and can't wait for this year. Raiders. That's Luke in the San Jose, which is, again, the 408. And, yeah, that's a great way to summarize it and put a bow on that conversation. It's been going back and forth here on the Locked On Raider podcast voicemail line about AP and what he has done to provide wins for the team or what he hasn't done to provide wins. This is the most positive that I think a fan base has felt about a Raiders coach in a very long time. I think this is the most hope that he's given all of us. Any coach has given any of us among Raider Nation in a very long time. And I think it's time that everyone makes sure that they're behind him because I think that there's some really good things on the way based off of everything you said and then some, right? The conversations I've had with him or about him to other people in the facility. So I just think that it's a really good time and he's a really good fit to be the Raiders head coach moving forward. At the end of the day, it's all about wins and losses. So the proof will be in the pudding sooner rather than later. Before you know it, we'll be talking about week 1 in LA, September 8th versus Chargers. Thanks so much, Luke. I appreciate the text. All good stuff all week long. Definitely appreciate the calls and texts. Have a fantastic weekend. Enjoy your first of the month coming up on Saturday and when the Raiders get some more money in their bank account. We'll be back on Monday doing what we do. We'll have calls and texts. We'll have news and notes. We'll have plenty of conversation as we do, and it'll be June already. Already June. Before we get out of here, I do want to shout out to Little Q. It's his 21st birthday on the 1st of the month, as a matter of fact, June 1st. So shout him out. He finally turns 21. He's been living like he's 21. Hey, Pops, let me roll with you here. Hey, Dad, let me go with you here. Hey, Dad, let me go with you here. Man, can't let you in. You're not 21. Now he can get in where he wants to get in. So, no, shout out to him. Good kid, 21 years old, coming up on Saturday. So I'll give him a big happy birthday as well. Till Monday, Raider Nation, take care of yourself, take care of your family, love on your family. More importantly, as always, just win, baby.